Today we're going to make kombucha using tamarind pulp. If you haven't had it, it's a very rich, dark flavor, sort of like a date. It's almost caramelly, and then it's also got a very strong punch of acid, kind of like a lemon, though not quite as sour. But it's not a very common drink ingredient. I really only know of the Aritos brand tamarind soda, but as someone who doesn't really drink soda, I've never tried it myself. If you haven't had it before, there's two varieties. There's this slightly unripened version, which is more sour, still sweet, and then there is the more mature one, which is sweeter and less sour, generally eaten by itself. The sour one, though, is used for cooking. I haven't really seen any kombuchas out there, at least in the grocery store, that use tamarind. And the only kombucha recipe I found is from the Big Book of Kombucha, which I do find is an interesting reference guide. The recipes are not quite to my taste. I usually like a little stronger flavor, a little sweeter flavor. So this week we're going to be venturing a little bit into unknown territory, and I think it'll be an opportunity to walk you through my thought process when trying to create a new flavor from scratch. But first, we have compressed tamarind pulp, and we need to turn this into something we can use. So we're going to make tamarind paste out of this. And my recipe starts with 4 ounces of this tamarind pulp and 1 cup of boiling water. Ooh. No, I take that back. It is as sour as a lemon. 1 cup of boiling water. And then I'm just going to mush this up a little bit so that it's all submerged under the water. And then we're going to let it sit for 20 minutes. And that'll help loosen up the pulp a little bit. That'll allow some of that flavor to come out. It's a very fibrous fruit, so we just want to try and get as much of that fruit off of the fiber as possible. So we'll be back once that's ready. 20 minutes are up, and our water has mostly cooled down, so it's now probably okay to handle. And I'm just going to mush it up as best I can with my fingers. Once it's mostly been mixed up, I'm going to pour it through a strainer. And it doesn't need to be perfect, as you'll see in a minute. So I'm just going to mix this up by hand, and I'm going to push through as much of the liquid as I can. Then any of the pulp that's left over goes back into our original bowl, along with half a cup of just room temperature water. And then it's just the same sort of thing again. We're going to mix it up and try to get as much of the fruit off of that fiber as we can. Admittedly, kind of an annoying process, but better than store-bought tamarind paste any day. And in the end, we're left with quite a bit of tamarind paste to work with. That was too big of a spoonful. It's quite sour, not very sweet. Oh my god. And the first thing that I like to do when starting with any sort of unknown fruit juice is to test the sugar content. Because I like to know where my sugars are at. I tend to base the entire recipe from that. So this is my refractometer, and I'm going to see if this is going to be able to give us a reading. I don't think it will. It looks a little too thick. We'll make a dilution. This is approximately 1 to 4. So it looks like we're at about 14.4% sugar. Oh, it's worse. And 14.4, it's not very far off from the sweetness of my usual pineapple juice. So I think we can use a similar sort of recipe. This is getting a little fat. I'm going to throw away the darker bottom half here. But the tamarind paste is more sour than the pineapple juice. And as the name implies, tamarind paste is a little thicker. It's a little more concentrated in flavor. So it could be that the flavor is too intense. And since I tend to use a lot of pineapple juice in my pineapple recipes, it could be that we can't do an equivalent match here. So we're going to make a test batch. I'm going to start with something like 100 grams of kombucha and about, say, 10 grams of the tamarind juice. We want to be careful and do a test batch here just because I'm not really certain what kind of tamarind kombucha I want. Do I want to highlight how sour it is? That is kind of the appeal. Do I want to enhance the sweetness so it's more drinkable like a soda? I know the Aritos brand tamarind soda has something like 44 grams of sugar for the type of bottle we'll make. That's about double or triple the amount of sugar I usually put. And does it a flavor that's going to stand well on its own, or is it going to be a little bit too thin? Maybe there's a complementary flavor that would make this a little tastier. Usually only using this paste for Thai cooking, so unless the pairing is fish sauce and shallots, I don't know if I have any ideas in mind, but I would think something along the lines of lime or perhaps ginger, some sort of tropical flavors, perhaps dates to enhance that dark caramel richness of the flavor. We'll have to play around, but first let me check how much tamarind sauce I think I want. I really hope I don't have to make another batch of tamarind paste here. It is pretty tamarindy. Let me add another 5 grams. I think around there is good, but now there's so much tamarind paste that's a little too sour, so I think I want to balance with a little bit of sugar. A little bit of sugar really rounds out that tamarind flavor. This is really good. And that was extra 3 grams of sugar. So let me do some math. Extrapolating out those numbers, it looks like we're going to add about 110 grams of our tamarind paste to the first bottle. I definitely did not make enough. Along with 14 grams of sugar. And that's our first bottle. And then to really enhance the flavor of the sour tamarind, I'm going to make another batch with less sugar. So this is going to be 10 grams of simple syrup, which should be about 7 grams of added sugar. And that's our second bottle. And then for our next bottle, I don't want to discredit the Big Book of Kombucha just without trying it. So we're going to use their recipe for Tamarind Kombucha, which is to use just 2 teaspoons of the paste. And that comes out to 13 grams, a tenth of what I used. And then they recommend no added sugar. And next up, we are going to make a lime tamarind kombucha, starting with 1/4 of a teaspoon of lime zest. And this might be a step that you want to skip, but I promise it is worth it. It adds so much more dimension to the lime flavor than you're going to get through lime juice alone. I'm going to add 24 grams of lime juice. These are some dry limes. And because the lime juice is so acidic and the tamarind paste is so acidic, I'm going to cut our tamarind paste down to 80 grams for this batch. And then 14 grams of simple syrup to help balance out all those sour flavors. And that is our tamarind lime. Next up, we are going to do a tamarind ginger, just to see what effect that really has on the flavor. Presumably, it makes the entire bottle taste like ginger. To that, another 110 grams of our tamarind paste. Just can't picture what a lot of this is going to taste like. And that's usually what I'm after with this channel. And this time, 10 grams of simple syrup. Just to help some of that bite from the ginger stand out. And that's our tamarind ginger. And finally, I've got a medjool date, something to help enhance that rich caramel flavor. I'm going to just smear about 10 grams of it. And if you're not eating these all the time, you are missing out because these are incredibly indulgent. Jam it in there with a chopstick. We're sticking with the 110 grams of tamarind paste and 10 grams of simple syrup. All of these I'm going to let ferment for 2 days at 78 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. With fruit sugars, it tends to only take 2 days for my fermentations. Syrups are usually about 3. Citrus is about 6. Those are just fun carbonation facts about my household. So we will come back to it once he's ready to drink. I'll say this one's got me a little bit nervous. Every time I see a recipe where it says 2 teaspoons and like some sort of brute, I add half a cup, it just makes me a little bit nervous. Makes me think I'm on the wrong track. But I just want to be able to taste the thing that I'm adding. If I make a tamarind kombucha, I want it to taste like tamarind. If I want to make a pineapple kombucha, I want it to taste like pineapple. I don't think that's so unreasonable. One thing I've noticed, though, is that there are 2 distinct layers here. There seems to be all of the brown tamarind flavoring has dropped to the bottom. I don't normally ever advise mixing a kombucha before drinking, but I think in this case, I also don't want to shake it too and have it explode in my eyeballs. I just want to make sure I get the flavor evenly dispersed. No time for a strainer. Oh, it's a lettuce sledge. Okay, that became brown. Smells very sour. There's some light grit floating in it. Very viscous. A lot more sour punch than a usual kombucha has. It's definitely thicker. There's a little bit of grit in there. There's a lot of that rich, sweet date flavor, and it covers up the apple cider taste of the usual black kombucha. It definitely smells and tastes a lot like the tamarind pulp. But is it good? Would I drink it? I don't know. It's kind of weird. I don't think I would seek this out. It's not that it's bad. It's very pleasant. I'll enjoy drinking it. It's just not better than a plain kombucha. I think because of how thick and gritty it is. And I guess we'll see if the book had it right cutting that volume down. But we'll find out here in a minute. Next up, we've got our same recipe, but with 6 grams less simple syrup, which is 3 grams less sugar overall. I don't know if sweetness was our issue, but let's take a look. I'm going to see what it tastes like before I pour again, because this is without inverting the bottle. It looks like just kombucha. I feel like some of the richness of the tamarind came through a little better there. Perhaps because it's less sweet. Make it brown. There is some pretty good carbonation there. A lot smoother, a lot cleaner with the strainer. There's not that thick, gritty mouthfeel. There is a stronger punch of acidity, which is pretty close to the tamarind pulp, but I think it's masking some of that more nuanced flavor. I think some of the richness there is hidden, some of the fruitiness. I think straining the first bottle is probably a smarter move. Do I need to go back and try that real quick? I think I need to go back and try that real quick. Hold on. Still a thick mouthfeel, but without that grit. It does improve it. But it makes it feel like you're drinking something kind of heavy. Like a milkshake. This feels very light and refreshing, acidic. This one's like thicker and sweeter, more cloying. What's the better representation? I'm going to go with our original. With number 2 here, it does more closely mimic the flavor of tamarind pulp. It is very that strong punch of sour. This one still packs pretty acidic punch, but it also has more rounded, more fruity flavor. Overall, I think this is more pleasant. Next up, bottle number 3, we have our Big Book of Kombucha recipe, which was 1,000% less tamarind paste. And I've got no real pride in this. I hope this is the better bottle. Because the recipe I used so much tamarind paste that there's no way anyone would be regularly making these bottles. But 2 teaspoons, though, is much more reasonable. Less carbonation, less brown. It's too sweet. There's no real acidity. There's no real flavor. It's just like the ghost of a raisin was inside. Yeah. Maybe on the exhale I can pick up a little of the tamarind, but otherwise it's practically invisible, which is why I didn't think we should add 2 teaspoons. Next up, we've got Tamarind Lime. This does have less tamarind paste in it than our original, just to ensure that when combined with the lime, it's not unpalatable. Hopefully. Ooh, smells a lot like lime. Good carbonation. Less brown. Ooh. Oh, that's really good. So there is 4 times as much tamarind paste as there is lime, but I only taste lime. This tastes like a limeade. But a really good limeade. I think it tastes kind of better than my usual limeade. I'm not getting a single trace of the tamarind. It's just, there's a lime bitterness, there's the lime acidity, there's a lot of sweetness. It's very refreshing and carbonated. I'm not getting any of the rich, earthy, caramel, fruity notes from the tamarind. It's pure lime. It's just a very good limeade. Let me make sure I inverted it enough. Okay, that's browner. Yeah, it's just lime. I don't know. It's a delicious limeade. Can't explain it, but I will drink it. I'm pretty sure that's better than my usual limeade, so I guess that's something for the notes. Moving on. Next up is our Tamarind Ginger, which has a scant ½ gram of ginger in it. Just smells like tamarind paste. Quite brown, good carbonation. I don't think those flavors pair together very well. I feel like the ginger's pretty subdued, but it kind of swings things more acidic, and it kind of buries the richer, fruitier flavors of the tamarind. You get a lot of sourness, you get a lot of prickly mouthfeel, you get a lot of sweetness, but the flavor doesn't really go beyond that. I think I'd rather have the pure tamarind. Whoop. Oh God. What did I put in here? Dates. Okay, that makes sense. I should have been more careful. Yeah. This is generally what happens when you add dates to a bottle. It does have that fruity caramel smell that dates have and tamarind can have. Yeah, that flavor is very prominent. It's not bad, but I think it's a little bit too prominent. I think it throws off the balance a little bit. But we only added 10 grams of the dates. Perhaps if we dialed back the sugar more, or if we cut the dates in half, I think we might be onto something. I mean, it's a very good flavor. It's very rich. It's very satisfying. Much more towards the fruity caramel notes than the sour. Still good, but it really subdues that sourness. So what do we learn? What do we take away from all this? Well, first, just always be safe when you're working with dates because they do tend to burst. Overall, I would say that I like tamarind paste, and I like these Tamarind Kombuchas, but I'll almost certainly never make any of these again, just because it's a lot of trouble to make up tamarind paste. Yeah, that's it. Store-bought tamarind paste I don't think would taste as good, and it would probably have a lot more preservatives. It's an interesting flavor, and it's a fruit that I like. It's just not my go-to as far as drinks go. But a good one to have in the bag, just in case I ever need a Tamarind Kombucha. And good to know that my instincts were correct on how much flavor to add, because I want it to taste like tamarind if I'm making a Tamarind Kombucha. I don't know why that's crazy. But every time I see other people's recipes, I add about 4 times as much of the flavoring as they do. Like an animal. But if any of these sound appealing to you, I feel like you should make them because they all were enjoyable. And I feel like the people I share them with will like them as well. So, until next time, this is Reckless Pooch.